Welcome to Unite and Win, a guide to workplace organizing, a podcast series by the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, presented in partnership with Haymarket Books. My name's Kim Kelly. Some of you may know me as Grim Kim online. I'm a labor journalist, lifelong metalhead, Philadelphia partisan, and author of 2 books on labor: Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor, and Fight to Win, Heroes of American Labor, the Young Readers Edition. I'm also a proud card-carrying union member, 3rd generation as a matter of fact. I'm repping the Wobblies and the Writers Guild of America East, where I also served 6 years on their leadership council. 10 years ago, I was part of a union drive at Vice Media, where I was working as the heavy metal editor, which is something you could do in 2015. We successfully organized about 500 workers by the time I got laid off in 2019. Our union was an enormous help for me and the 200 other people who got that day. Lately, I've been having some great conversations with labor organizers about their own experiences fighting like hell to organize their workplaces across industries, from education and media to fast food and nursing. These conversations are based on EWOC's Unite and Win handbook, which you heard our buddy Wes narrate. They're our way of digging into these lessons with real-world examples that help to illustrate just how much a union can help us accomplish when we come together and fight. Today's episode is all about the basics of organizing. I'll let our guests, Dawn Tefft and Bob Lawson, take it from here. I would love to meet you two. If you could just introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into it.
So I'm Dawn Tefft, she, her, based in Chicago. And my current title with EWOC is lead organizer. I'm also an advanced organizer, so I play double roles there.
And I'm Bob Lawson, he, him, in Chicago. I guess I'm the same as Dawn, and I'm also a retiree in life.
Nice. So I'm not as well versed as some other folks in the cosmology of EWOC. What does it mean to be a lead organizer / advanced organizer? What does that role look like for you guys?
So the lead organizers help coordinate the organizing programs, and some of the major issues with campaigns kind of percolate their way up to us when folks are struggling. And then if we're struggling with it, we might talk to folks outside, because sometimes things are thorny, And then an advanced organizer is somebody who usually takes on campaigns of their own, supporting, workers. But in addition to that is being a sort of sounding board and sometimes advice giver for what we call intermediate organizers, so that nobody is left without a resource within EWOC. All of us have people we can reach out to, when things are thorny or we need somebody to bounce something off of. Somebody might have experience in an area that we don't, etc.
You can tell that this project was set up by union organizers, because that sounds like a dream compared to some kinds of campaigns that I've heard about before.
Oh yeah, I used to be dropped off just somewhere as a union organizer, and it's like, find your feet. Your car is your office.
Now, I know the two of you, this isn't your first rodeo. One does not simply become an advanced organizer. Could you tell us about how you got involved in the labor world in the first place? Like, what's your backstory? And then how did you get involved with EWOC? How do those two things fit together?
When you're as old as me, your backstory is really old. I actually got involved in the labor movement coming out of the civil rights movement, organizing poor and white working class people, and got hooked on organizing. And then many decades ago, I went and worked when Tom Hayden was running for the U.S. Senate in California. And I was the labor coordinator, not because I knew anything about the labor movement, but because I knew about organizing working class people. And there I met farm workers at the time that they were actually doing real organizing. And so my first organizing experience for the labor movement was in the Imperial Valley in California, organizing farm workers at the time that they were running big elections and winning campaigns. So I learned a lot about organizing. That's how I got into the labor movement and learned the basics of organizing. And I got involved in EWOC. I can't even remember exactly how after I retired. And it seemed like we needed more organizers. And what can I do to share some of my experiences and be helpful?
Wow. Dawn, how about you?
The first thing I always share with people that I think was sort of the springboard for me is that I grew up in poverty. So, based on my background, I always saw the need for changing our economic circumstances. That was always paramount for me. I was a fast food worker for 5 years, some really terrible jobs that really grind you down and leave you without hope in a lot of instances, right? Unless you're organizing. Didn't organize there, didn't yet know what it was. It wasn't until I went to grad school that I became familiar with unions. And it was in between my master's and my PhD that I was in a couple of adjunct unions for the first time. They weren't doing a lot of organizing, though, and nobody talked to me a lot about the unions much. So I still didn't know much about unions. That's the thing. You can be in a union and still not be deeply understanding of them. So it wasn't until my PhD that, I was in an environment where people were organizing all the time, talking about it all the time, building community, building relationships, wanting to organize to win that. I don't know if my peers had read a bunch of labor notes articles, but that was the environment in which I was steeped, right? That kind of thinking about organizing. So from day one, I was learning you need to get your peers involved. You need to have lots of people involved, steward system, all of this, right? And we want it to be bottom up. And then during the last year when I was recruited to be president, which at first I didn't want to be, it was in that year, in my last year as president, that the Wisconsin uprising happened. This was the union, grad union at UW-Milwaukee. That was the most beautiful experience I've ever had in my life. All those voices, all those bodies together, chanting, taking action, planning, resisting. And so from there, I was hooked. And as soon as I graduated, I got a job as a union organizer. And now I've been in the labor movement for nearly 20 years now. I'm doing active union work. And it's one of my life's passions.
Man, I'm jealous that you'll have so much experience. I got into this the way that a lot of people did. My job kind of sucked, and we decided to unionize about it. And I decided, oh, this is my new favorite thing. I need to learn everything about this. I need to read labor notes. I need to read all the labor history books. I need to read about California and read about Alabama and just soak it all in. And I guess that's how you kind of muddle your way through until you find someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And Bob, you kind of got in on the ground floor in a way. In the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, like you've been part of ups and downs. And I'm curious about your experience kind of dealing with the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty parts of organizing and union recognition and dealing with the NLRB and being involved in Ask Me and AFL-CIO. Like your resume is pretty intense. I think you're selling yourself a little short. Could you just kind of talk a little bit about how before there's this kind of newer upswing and interest in public support for unions, what it was like to organize and try to get those cars and try to get recognition and fight the bosses? What were some of those battles like in previous decades?
Well, organizing is concrete and it has to do with actual experiences. So my first sort of exposure to what organizing was and what it meant to people was actually when I got out of high school. My first job, everyone knew a union job was good because there were union jobs all over the place. And so I got that. But then when I was organizing in Chicago, in Uptown, which was a poor white, it was called the Hillbilly Ghetto at the time. And we had an organization that was called Community Union. You could tell when you were talking to some of the older guys that had been mine workers, the union guys immediately knew what organizing was, what getting people together, what it meant in improvements in their lives. And that was my impression of what the labor movement was what it had meant to these miners. And so then my experience in California meeting a lot of the labor bureaucracy and stuff like that, because at that point, 75, 76, the labor movement was still pretty entrenched in terms of the private sector. The public sector was just starting to organize. The teachers were starting to organize. And I was lucky enough that the farm workers were also starting to organize. And so Tom Hayden was a radical anti-war candidate running against an establishment Democrat. And so I was told by activists in the labor movement, what you need to do is organize the rank and file And the people who ended up endorsing Tom Hayden were the teachers union, the farm workers, and then we had a lot of rank and file because we'd go to local union meetings and stuff like that. So the labor movement had sort of two tiers because it was the beginning of the organizing of the farm workers and the beginning of the organizing of the teachers in a militant way, whereas the UAW, the AFL-CIO, et cetera, was pretty bureaucratic at the time. And at the same time that the labor movement was starting to change, a lot of the old student movement, or what was called the New Left, that I would say was still connected to reality, was also like organizing and trying to figure out what to do. So I was working with Heather Booth with the Midwest Academy, where we were trying to build a coalition between the emerging new left that was doing community organizing that eventually became Citizen Action, and the sort of left wing of the labor movement, where we built the Citizen Labor Energy Coalition. So I got to meet some socialists within the labor movement, et cetera. But at that time, the public sector was really starting to percolate and starting to organize. And one of my goals in Chicago was always to undermine the democratic machine. And so there was opportunity, we thought, to organize the city employees because they were the backbone of the patronage system. If they got their own voice, that could start to dismantle the machine. So long story short, but anyway, I got the opportunity to be a lead organizer when we organized the city of Chicago employees. And at that time was after Harold Washington had been elected mayor, the first black mayor. And the city was really racially divided at the time. And so figuring out how to build a grassroots movement of workers, and it was particularly intense because the old democratic machine was spewing all this racist stuff. And so how do you build an alliance with the white workers and the black workers? And part of it was convincing people that the workers owned the process, both white workers, black workers, professionals, non-professionals, and stuff like that. So that was really exciting. And as people who have been through organizing campaigns know, when you go through an organizing campaign, you build relationships with people that are more intense and more meaningful. And also people are realizing new things about themselves. You get experiences you would never have in life. And you knew at the end of that, even though you may never see some of these people or work with them, that you have a bond that will last for the rest of your life because you all have done something important together. You know, to me, that's the essence of organizing.
There's so many little pieces I want to pull out of that, but Dawn, I want to hear your perspective too, as someone who, like you said, you kind of came into the union world really fresh, right? You're like, I don't quite know about this union stuff, but it seems like a good idea. Let's see what it's all about. And it eventually became a pretty big deal to you. And a couple of the words that Bob used, professional, non-professional, white collar, blue collar, these sort of artificial ultimately divisions that do kind of come into play when we're organizing, especially when we're talking about industries and workplaces that don't have a long history in manufacturing or agriculture. Like you're talking about organizing in education, in the grad student sector, and places where folks go to work in an office. They're not going down the coal mine, but they're still workers. They're still having their labor exploited. They still need a union. Could you just talk a little bit about your experience doing that kind of organizing and how you learned to get through to your fellow workers that might not have been thinking, oh, we need a union, we need to organize, we are workers? Because you were kind of like doing grad student organizing before it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, so unions are for everybody. All forms of labor are labor, and we're all exploited by our employers and the economic systems that they're embedded in and we're embedded in. And it can be harder when you're working with people who maybe view themselves as not needing a union because they have some idea that it's for, say, blue collar workers, So you really have to focus on the issues, right? Which is the core of any organizing. So what are the problems that are arising for people? What do they need? What do they not have? What could they have that would make life better, work better, teaching better, and also help them connect that to the larger good? Because we don't teach just to earn paychecks. We teach because education is an important component of being a citizen in the world, who knows how to vote or take action, how to treat others, how to be in community with others, fight for the things that we need collectively. Education, as we've seen, is under attack by the far-right forces precisely for this reason, because they want an electorate that's not informed, that's not willing to fight back, right? That doesn't know what they need or doesn't know that people have won things in the past. And educators are right in that sweet spot where they can connect people to that kind of information, and where education is where we're discussing and dialoguing and breaking through the barriers of our past. You have students from all sorts of backgrounds in your classrooms, typically, people from farms, people from cities, people who grew up poor, people who were solidly middle class. And so it becomes a sort of microcosm of the larger world in a lot of ways. But also, I'd say the adjunctification of higher ed has begun to make that easier over time. I'd say 40 years ago now, probably, most college instructors would have been tenured, which means they would have had job protections and job security and good pay and good benefits. Now, most of the workforce, probably like 70% or so, are adjuncts. And so that means they do not make a living wage. They usually do not receive health care. They do not, in most cases, have job security. They might have a job one semester, not the next. They're generally working at, say, 3 institutions if they're adjuncting solely for a living, or else they're working at a restaurant as a server and then, also teaching college classes. I think even a lot of the people who are in the labor movement don't realize how oppressed adjunct workers are and graduate workers are. They earn far less than a lot of what we consider the traditional blue-collar workers. They don't have the same job security, they don't have the pay. So, really talking about how while we all enter this arena thinking we're the ones who are going to get the brass ring at the end, hardly anybody actually does. So you cannot count on that. And really helping people connect the graduate worker fight to that fight that adjuncts are going to be in, and that the tenured faculty are also in, because their jobs are also eroded by the adjunctification of higher ed. So it's really a fight that we all have in common once we're willing to view it that way and see that working across these false divisions, getting unity around the issues, is what will win the day.
Unite and Win is presented in partnership with Haymarket Books, publisher of a wide range of essential radical books that are especially relevant to listeners like you. One that you might be interested in reading is Organized Labor and the Black Worker, 1619 to 1981, by Philip S. Fauner. In this classic account, now available with a foreword by the Robin D.G. Kelley, acclaimed historian Philip Fauner traces the radical history of Black workers' contributions to the American labor movement. As Kelley puts it in his foreword, this book is a stunning achievement. It still stands as the most comprehensive treatment to date of African American workers and the labor movement. Solidarity is the book's central message. When white workers attempt to go it alone or build exclusionary, racist unions, they don't win. Find Organized Labor and the Black Worker at haymarketbooks.org, where all paperback books are 20% off every day.
Another thing I'd say is that grad workers are often the ones who are most willing to fight on a campus. They're the ones who are often setting the pace for the other unions on campus, leading the way. And it's a little bit hard because oftentimes the faculty view the grad workers as children, even though they are well into their adulthood. But regardless of that, it's still the grad workers who wind up often helping the other unions on campus see that when you fight, you win. And I love working with grad workers for that reason. I was working for the UIC GEO, so the grad worker union at University of Illinois at Chicago. And so I was the staffer for them when they went on their first strike. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. You saw grad students see their power through this strike. They were on strike for 3 weeks, and near the end, We'd won pretty much everything they'd wanted to win through the strike. And then we were holding out one more day to win back pay for the days they were on strike. So you really have to be willing to do that, right? Not all unions are willing to put up that fight. And they went for it. We were also flyering students on campus who were there for recruitment day as extra form of pressure because we knew that the strike needed something to escalate it to get that back pay. And then on that last day, the strike band that had formed sort of spontaneously during the strike wound up playing punk rock songs on the quad, just taking it over entirely. And it was just like this sort of like lawlessness, chaotic day that was really inspiring. And, people on the last day, they were pounding on the tables. They had packed the room. So there were hundreds of grad workers in the room and spilling into the halls, pounding on the tables and chanting, demanding their back pay. So these workers can be hard to move, but they also can be some of the most passionate, willing to fight workers out there. And I'd also add, like with faculty, one of the challenges there are the folks who are seeking tenure but don't yet have it. So I was the lead organizer on the first contract campaign for the faculty union at UIC when I was working for AFT as a lead organizer. And some of the folks who were seeking tenure were the least willing at first to participate in the strike. Because imagine this, you've spent all your life, for a lot of these people studying, years and years and years, multiple degrees. You have maybe $100,000, $200,000 in debt. So everything that you're doing rides on your getting tenure, right? So there's a lot of fear for them that if they don't reach that final rung, their entire life is going to be undermined. And so, you really have to talk to them about, hey, look at all these other faculty who are stepping up. Look at the other folks who have your back. You're not alone in this. There's power and greater safety in numbers. And look at all these other unions that have won when they went on strike. And so you have multiple conversations with them. And over time, they begin to see the logic of that and begin to feel more secure by standing with their fellow workers and realize, oh, yeah, they do have my back. I have their back too. A majority of them do wind up joining the fight. But it takes time because their fears are grounded in things that are understandable, right?
Yeah, shit's scary out there.
Yeah.
And, something that you both mentioned is the need to fight, is the fact that specific types of workers in general are under attack. And now y'all have been around long enough to deal with the fact that every 4 years or so, things can either get a little bit easier or a lot worse, depending on who's in power, who they're trying to destroy. And right now we're in a bad spot. We're dealing with an incredibly anti-worker, anti-labor, anti-life, anti-working class, anti-poor, anti-everybody administration that's been dismantling as much of the safeguards that we've been able to put in there. It's going after the NLRB, the NLRA, every useful acronym we can think of. And so since you've been through this before, maybe not this specific flavor of authoritarian anti-labor crackdown, but you've seen it get bad before. You're still organizing the next generation with EWOC. You're still out here. You haven't given up. We've a difficult road to hoe. So what do you think is at stake here? And how can we survive? And how can we ensure that we come out of this with a stronger movement, with stronger and more militant, more dedicated workers and organizers? Bob, please give me some hope.
Well, I think this is a culmination of maybe a 50-year attack on working people, on the labor movement in particular, by a faction of the rich and powerful that have been working at this consciously for a long time. And this is a culmination of it. If you look at what's happened to the organized labor movement since, I would say, the early 1970s or something like that, in terms of the conscious attack on it. And so I don't think this is particularly new. I think some of this is even predictable. As Dawn mentioned, the Wisconsin uprising. Well, Republicans, when they've gotten electoral power in states, have eliminated executive order, have eliminated collective bargaining, et cetera, and Democrats have not passed labor law reform for forever, despite having majorities, et cetera. And so what I think is at stake is what we've already lost. We now have the greatest wealth inequality in the history of the country. And I've watched it go from the opposite. So I think that what's at stake is the ability of average people to have decent lives and the need to rein in corporate wealth, individual wealth, because wealth leads to power, to political power. So I think it's the essence of the struggle of what we're going through. I think workplace struggle is critical. I don't think it's the only thing. I think there's community struggle, there's ideological struggle, there's media, there's all of that part. But I think at the base of it is organizing. And my hope is that it's been done. People react, right? When the labor movement was built and when we got the greatest equality was coming out of the period like we're in now, at the end of the World War II, at the end of the Gilded Age, whatever. People just said, I'm sick of this. We can't take it anymore. And there were organizers that were figuring out how to do it. So I think our only chance of doing this is doing real organizing, talk to people, try to build community, try to build organizations that are looking at ways to take power and to empower people. The fact that unions are so popular now, the fact that young people are wanting to organize is really hopeful. And so I think that part of what EWOC is trying to do is to help people learn those skills. And as Dawn's talking about graduate students and the fact that they're going to go out and they're going to have those skills, and that's going to be a huge gain for the country. And the thing that we have to do, those of us who consider ourselves organizers, especially old people like me, need to tell younger people that it's hard, but it's rewarding and it's important, and that even though you do sacrifice a lot, you gain a lot. I always have hope when I see people wanting to learn to organize, because I know that they themselves are going to be happier and more fulfilled, and that is something that they can pass on to other people.
You got to plant the seeds. Dawn, I know you have some thoughts here. Let's end on a whatever note that feels right to you, but I feel like there might be a little hope to be found.
Yeah. And first, I love everything that Bob said. So thank you so much, Bob, for laying such a good foundation there. And, I also think that it takes more than one type of organizing. So labor organizing, community organizing, street protests, these are all wonderful bedfellows. We need to be doing all of this. It's going to take all of us coming out in multiple different ways. And I've been inspired by the people who've been coming out for the mass protests. I think they might be the largest in the U.S. history, if I remember correctly. I think that's inspiring because we've not seen this before. We've not seen this level of oppression before or in a long time, but we've also not seen this level of hope and community and willingness to fight back and come out in the streets together. And I will say that I can find a lot of hope, in what I saw in Wisconsin during the Wisconsin uprising. As we know, that there's been a concerted effort to undermine education, workers in general. We saw that in Wisconsin where, the Koch brothers, they'd funded a think tank that came up with this plan to undermine unions, the public sector, the safety nets that we all have that make life livable. And they've been largely successful in that in a lot of ways. And, that's part of why we are at the moment we are at under Trump too, right? And both from the Democrats and Republicans, both parties have contributed to that in various ways. But what we saw in Wisconsin was people coming out again, in all those different ways that Bob had pointed to, right? We had unions coming out to protest in the Capitol and then taking it back to their hometowns. That's the part that gets left out, I think, of the telling of the Wisconsin uprising a lot. People focus on the Capitol, but it came back to our towns and our cities. Like we were, in Wisconsin, we were coming together across gender, across race, across political ideology, where we thought we were on the political spectrum, across job title, whether we were unionized or not. People saw that we need livable jobs, we need healthcare, we need education, we need retirement. We need all of these things. We need a safety net because lives change quickly. People have accidents, people lose jobs. So we can't live without all the things Bob had so clearly, articulated that people had fought for and won and then maintained before, right? And as the staff person who supported what turned out to be the only majority status union to form during the entire 8 years that Scott Walker was governor. I supported them on their unionization campaign. And so I can tell you that what worked for those workers was talking about, like, look, this was the seat of public unionism. That's been taken away now in many ways, right? Like, they took away the right to bargain over anything except for wages up to CPI. And even then, unions would need to certify every year, recertify every year. They took away payroll deduction for dues and something else I'm forgetting off the top of my head. So it was a really uphill fight. And a lot of people were disillusioned by that, right? But what worked for that union was talking about, like, look, we didn't have these things for all of history. We had to fight to win these in the first place. And really emphasizing over and over again that power does not derive from politicians. Power derives from us. So we can put them in office, we can take them out, we can pressure them, we can strike, we can go out in the streets and protest, we can do all sorts of things that make them move on things. So we are the source of power. We don't stop organizing just because something changes at the electoral level. We don't stop organizing because something changes at the state or federal level. We are the ones who control our lives, and we're going to make sure that people listen.
I cannot think of a better place to end this conversation. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your experience and your passion and your memories. I'm so glad that UWalk has you, and so glad that the labor movement has you, because obviously we all need each other, but it's so good to talk to people that really get it and have been doing this work for a while and are trying to make sure that the next generation of workers brings it just as hard as you did and are. Obviously, no one's retired. Bob's retired, but he's clearly not retired.
Bob is a legend.
Thanks for listening to Unite and Win, a guide to workplace organizing from the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee and Haymarket Books. Visit haymarketbooks.org to find indispensable radical books, podcasts, virtual events, and other political education resources, including the Unite and Win handbook. Please also consider joining the Haymarket Book Club. It's one of the best ways to support Haymarket and help fund projects like this one. I'm your host, Kim Kelly. Julia Yort is our senior producer, and Rachel Leitner is our engineer. Production support comes from Daphna Tier and Megan Swoboda. Music from Epidemic Sound. Listen to Unite and Win, a guide to workplace organizing, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, show us some love by subscribing, rating, or reviewing our series. 5 stars, please. It would also be pretty cool of you to share it with a friend, a coworker, or a fellow troublemaker who just might benefit from a little inspiration. Solidarity forever and lots of love from your pal, Kim.
The Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee supports any worker, anywhere in the country, in any sector, organizing for something better. Visit us at workerorganizing.org if you're ready to organize your workplace or volunteer with us. Please also consider making a donation in support of our work at workerorganizing.org/donate.